Okay, welcome back, everybody. Um, our next speaker is going to be Ryan Goodman. I'm sure many of you may recognize Ryan Goodman from the past when he worked with Montana stock growers, and then he moved to Colorado, and currently he's working on a Red Angus uh, facility down in Colorado. And it gives me great pleasure to bring Ryan Goodman back. He's worked with us before, and in the past, Ryan's taught some leadership classes. But one of the more important things that Ryan does is he really works on advocating for agriculture. And I thought with all the things going on in the world and in agriculture right now, it's very relevant and very important to talk about diversity in agriculture. And that's something that I think Ryan speaks very well to. So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Goodman.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. And glad to be here today and sharing a few of my experiences with everybody. So I don't know if I have permission to be able to share my screen yet. So if we can get that turned on.
Yeah, Lindsay should be switching that over here in just a second.
Okay. But yeah, thanks. And I've been able to attend and speak at this meeting before in previous years. So definitely glad to be able to reach out and share with everybody else and kind of some of my experiences. I'll say that today, touching on the topic of diversity and inclusion, I won't pretend to be speaking for everyone. And sometimes talking about some of these things can make some folks, a little uncomfortable. But I believe that being able to get outside of our comfort zone is really important and helping us to learn and to grow. And speaking about some of these things is sometimes uncomfortable for me as well. But I think it's important that we have these discussions and that we are having these conversations about things that our consumers view as valuable and important. So I'm not pretending to speak for everyone, but I do want to approach the topic today through the lens of advocacy. Advocacy is something that I've been working on for well over a decade with our ag community across the country. And so I think that we have a role as advocates in agriculture today as it relates to diversity and inclusion in our own community and as consumers are asking of us today. So I've got a few slides here to share just to kind of illustrate a couple of things, but feel free to use the chat, use the Q&A as questions come to mind throughout the presentation. I'll keep eye on that as well as our host and moderator in being able to bring some of those up. So I definitely have time at the end and throughout if you want to ask any questions for that. So if you want to connect with me online, anywhere you want to look, you can find me as Beef Runner. That's beefrunner.com and any of the social media sites where you can kind of find my presence there. To give you a little bit more perspective on my background and where I come from, I grew up on my family's cow-calf and stocker operation in Northeast Arkansas, a place where we get nearly 60 inches of moisture a year and plenty of grass. And so I was very thankful to be able to grow up on an operation that was diversified and had that opportunity to learn about cattle from the very beginning stages on a larger scale all the way into the feed yards. And I went to school at Oklahoma State University and University of Tennessee, focusing on cattle nutrition and reproduction. Had the opportunity to broaden my experiences and work in several different large scale feed yards, Cactus and Five Rivers in the industry. And when you're managing 45 to 60,000 head of cattle every year or every day, you learn quite a bit about cattle nutrition, cattle handling, and it's definitely on a different scale. But I think one of those most important aspects of that job was learning how to work with people. As a 21-year-old, it's not always the easiest thing to manage a crew of pen riders, but you have to learn how to communicate and you have to learn how to earn their trust in part of that relationship. Throughout this journey, I learned that sharing my story was very important. I started a blog when I worked on a ranch in Wyoming, just kind of sharing the daily aspects of ranch life in a very different environment than what I grew up in. And before I knew it, as I was sharing those daily, what I thought were commonplace experiences online, I had people from all over the country asking me questions because they thought that these things were very interesting and that they wanted to learn more about. And so I took a pivot after grad school and dove more into the communications realm and advocacy realm of the industry. And that's what took me to Montana for 4 great and awesome years working with the stock growers, not only the stock growers, but several different ag groups across the state, including Farmers Union and the ag experiment stations. and working with a whole network of farmers and ranchers across the state. And then that took me to Denver in Colorado, where I am now. Previously, I was with a national organization, and being able to work with farmers and ranchers all across the country, traveling and speaking at 70 meetings or more a year. And then COVID hit, the pandemic, right? And that kind of threw a wrench in travel, but along with a couple of other things, kind of taking some pivot. And that's where I find myself now, back and ranching on a daily basis on a Red Angus seed stock and feed yard operation in northern Colorado. Throughout all this journey, I'm really lucky to be able to work with such a vast network of farmers, ranchers, and members of the ag community, and sharing our stories. And whenever I get the opportunity, I have I call it an addiction sometimes, to running. I started running a 5K here and there. I went to California with a group of ranchers from Montana to run a 24-hour relay. And that really sparked a fire as I got on the trails in central Montana and kind of started exploring. I ran my first half marathon near Yellowstone, and that was pretty fun. And then I ran my first marathon at the Governor's Cup there in Helena, and I finished that almost 4 hours of running, and I sat down and my legs were tired. I was dead. And I said, I'm good. But as luck would have it, the next summer I ran my first 50-mile race in Western Montana. And ever since then, I've run over 30 ultra marathons, ranging from 50 kilometers all the way to 100 kilometers, and training for a 100-mile race at the time. And you're like, God, you're crazy, right? But that's my form of advocacy. You can see in a picture here on the screen that I run with Team Beef on my jersey, and it never fails that it catches people attention. And we're out there running, and I'm running with people that are primarily from urban and suburban America, and we're out there connecting as fellow runners. We're out there connecting and talking about all the training that went into that race day, all the food that we get to eat at aid stations, our love for public lands and wildlife and the outdoors. And then they ask me, so Ryan, what's that Team Beef about? And that makes me excited, because I know that I've made a personal connection with them to be able to share my passion for agriculture and how beef helps to fuel my fitness and my running lifestyle. And so you don't have to agree with everyone on everything in order to have a civil discussion. And part of that is being able to connect with other people as a person first. And so there are a lot of topics today that can divide us. There are a lot of topics that can be really controversial. But if we take time to connect with other people first, that will lead to a much greater civil discussion. So if you leave here today and don't remember anything else, I hope that you remember that little bit of a tip. And so one of the topics today that we're talking about is diversity, right? And so over the past year, that has definitely been a hot topic in the U.S. As we've seen a lot of civil unrest in major cities in America. We've seen a lot of conversations online that have led to friends and family, breaking those connections, defriending everybody, unfollowing everybody over things that we disagree upon. And diversity has been a really hot topic in our society today. A lot of people take different stands on that. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's not ag's issue. We don't deal with that. We have a lot of great people in agriculture today, but I think diversity and inclusion is something that we should address because it is important to our consumers. It should be important to us. And so for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to walk through a little bit of what do diversity and inclusion mean through these lenses, and then why would it matter to us? And then finally, we'll wrap up with a couple of things, a couple of tips that I have to share with you that can help us to launch some of those conversations to address some of these concerns. And so to kind of walk back here, I want to look at the definition of diversity. How do we define diversity? Now, a lot of us, in these current societal moments, we think of race, but it's a very broad definition that can be used in a number of different ways. We think about race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. When we're talking about it through this lens of advocacy, is it a rural urban divide? Is it political beliefs? Or even within our industry, are we looking at diversity in industry background and experiences? So when I'm talking about diversity today, I want you to think about it through that lens. It's not only protected classes, but how are we all different? How do we bring different things to the table? And I think that that's really important. And we in ag have a very diverse community. We have diverse people representing all of these, whether we're talking about operations that are led by women, right? A third of farm operators are women. A third of farm businesses, ag businesses, are owned and operated by women. We're talking about people of color are also represented in that, especially when you get into the processing sector of our industries. There's a lot of diversity in that, but we also have a lot of diversity in our allied industry services. And so it's not only producers as well. We've got different levels of education, different sexual orientations. We've got different political beliefs, right? When we come together as a policy organization, I think that that's one of the great things as being a grassroots policy organization, is that we can bring people together with different political beliefs, and we can come together on a solution that helps everyone. But we also have a lot of diversity in industry background and experience, right? Whether you're a fifth generation farmer or rancher, you're a first generation farmer or rancher, or someone that's coming in allied industry, trying to get a foot in the door. And so there's lots of people, lots of different people that, represent very diverse groups within our industry. And this is really important. So I know in agriculture, we're like, well, we have to make a living. Why would diversity be important to my business? And it definitely is important. If you look at industry and business surveys across the board, you will find that businesses with more diverse representation on their boards and their workforces and leadership, whether that be a senior leadership or middle management, and they are successful at being inclusive of those diverse groups, those organizations will outperform others who do not do that well by at least 33%. And that's from a variety of different statistics and surveys and reports that are out there. But diversity can bring a lot of different views to the table, and that can mean a lot of different things for different businesses. But being able to have different perspectives at the table can help us to be more innovative, more progressive, and more successful as things continue to change. And so diversity and inclusion was kind of defined to me in a podcast that I was listening to one day. Is diversity is counting everyone in the room, right? We can be able to do that. Do we have diverse representation in the room? But diversity doesn't happen without action, and that is inclusion. And so inclusion in this sense can be making sure that every person in the room counts. Are we valuing everyone's opinions and perspectives and contributions? And so I think that that is where an opportunity, we in agriculture as advocates have an opportunity to improve. Are we making sure that every person's contributions are valued when someone speaks up, or are they comfortable in speaking up? Are we valuing those contributions instead of dismissing them? And there are lots of occasions where this can be seen in agriculture today, whether it's an organization and a junior staff member speaks up, or whether you have members of minority status, whatever definition of diversity or that you're looking at, are their opinions and perspectives valued when they're brought to the table, or are they comfortable enough to bring them forward? Right. So one of the examples that I thought of this was there was a conversation, a comment made to me on Twitter today, was, do we have a place in our organizations for ag workers? Not just farm owners and farm operators, but ag workers across the board. Are we valuing and being inclusive of their perspectives and their contributions to our industry? And something that I hear a lot from producers today is, I'm fine with whatever that diversity is. I feel like I'm very inclusive, but you know what? I don't care what your status is as long as you do a good job. And on the surface, that's great. Yes, we want employees that do good jobs, that make great contributions. But saying that disregards the contributions and demeans the contributions that diversity brings to the table. And that's something that would be referred to a lot as being colorblind. Saying, well, I don't want to know what your religion is. I don't want to know what your orientation is or what you do outside of the job. I don't want to know what color you are. That's very demeaning to people that don't feel like their perspectives are valued or heard. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you say it matters and how can we have these conversations that helps to make diverse people, different people feel like their perspectives are heard and valued at the table. And one way we can measure that, thinking back to diversity and inclusion in the business place, how can this matter to a business? In those same surveys and reports, a common theme is that businesses that are more successful at inclusion have greater retention and presence of diverse employees. And so take a look at a business. Do you see a business, and employee turnover is always a thing, but is there a higher rate of turnover of diverse groups, diverse employees that are there, or those that are there? How present are they in their work? Are they there just to do a job, or how do they feel about their contributions and how they are valued? And that's kind of a common theme when we're looking at that. So that leads me to a question: is diversity and inclusion our issue? Is diversity and inclusion something that matters to us in agriculture? There are a lot of great people in agriculture, and we do a lot of great work. We have very strong values of hard work and contributions. But I want to take a step back. Is diversity and inclusion something that matters to us in agriculture? And I want to suggest yes, with a couple of examples. This is, I think, Twitter kind of gets Twitter, if you're on there, it gets a reputation for being very harsh for a lot of people. And these are some examples. This first picture on the left of the screen, is a meme that was posted back in June of 2020, when a lot of protests were going on racial inequality. And the meme says, "Riot control, fill these," which is a crop applicator, a crop spray applicator, aerial applicator with pepper spray. That in itself, okay, fine, it's a joke. What happens though is when we make those little jokes, they continue into conversations that continue to demean people of minority groups, suggesting, yeah, we should fill it with, hot sauce or anhydrous. These are poisons, right? So we're suggesting here, the conversation that followed in this Twitter thread was, yes, we should poison these people who think differently than us. And this is just one example that got very, very rough. And so I bring this up to say um, yeah, it's our issue. Um, and so it's not always something, when you're talking about diversity and inclusion or discrimination, it's not always a big action that is going to say, hey, I can point that out and I can say, hey, you're discriminating. No, a lot of the times is it the little comments that are made at the bar, little demeaning snides at, at women or people of color or different sexual orientations. Those things can all add up and be very degrading to people that are different from us. And so think about those things that they're all around. This can also include, some ag organizations have policies against marriage, certain types of marriage. This is happening in agriculture today when we're seeing this, or is it businesses that choose not to do business with people in the LGBTQ community because of that status? There are different examples all throughout the industry of where those things are happening. And so I'd encourage you to kind of take a look at some of those examples. I won't labor on some of these because they are all around us and can take quite a while to walk through. But I want to just point out that they are there. Also, why would it be ag's issue to care about some of these things? So I want to point back to a business example when they're looking at the larger business perspective, and some surveys that have come out in the past year as diversity and inclusion has become a larger national issue. Surveying this, looking at different brands and different industries across that, they've shown that brands that invest in diverse, inclusive, and socially conscious efforts are able to build stronger relationships with their customer base, customer loyalty. We know customers have affinity for different brands for different reasons, and personal values are included into that. And not always that the brands align with them, but do they respect and acknowledge those different values? That can be a really important part of being able to take advantage of some of those things. And some of the recent surveys, this one from top design firms, showed that 64% of consumers are at least somewhat likely to purchase a product if the brand embodies diversity and inclusion. 64%, almost 2/3. That's a big number. And I would have reason to believe that that number will continue to grow as these conversations about diversity and inclusion continue to develop. Now, how does that bridge to agriculture? Because I want to ask, how long, we know 64%, and we're talking about shoes, clothing, whatever, marketing products, whatever that might look like. How long until the consumers consider diversity and inclusion in the purchase of food and ag products? How long until we look at a label on a food product, or we look at a company's value statements online and say, do I want to support this company? And I'd argue a lot of that is already taking place. One example that we can look at over the past couple of decades, we've seen growing consumer demand for sustainable products. And now sustainability is a huge definition, right? But we're looking at the three pillars of economic, environment, and social sustainability. So you're looking at land practices, stewardship, conservation. Are companies giving back to their communities? Are we working with wildlife? In farms and ranches, we have a big tie to land practices. We have a big tie. Are we providing for wildlife habitat? Are we providing for clean air and clean water? These are things that consumers care about as well. And over the past couple of decades, we've, as an ag industry, have done great jobs in recognizing and acknowledging those concerns and changing our practices or adopting new practices in our industry to be able to respond to those consumers' concerns. And so we've got a demonstrated ability to show that, hey, yes, sustainability is important to our customers and it is important to us. And here's how we execute upon those things to be able to demonstrate that. Another more recent example that has really come to light and really taking a lot of actions in this has been animal welfare. We've seen animal activist groups for a long time release videos. And here recently in the last decade, we've seen a lot more action taking place in consumers wanting to purchase products from animals that were treated well, treated humanely. And consumers are caring about beef or an animal welfare. And one of the projects that I've been involved in the last couple of years in helping to communicate some of those messages, for example, is beef quality assurance. We see quality assurance across a number of different sectors of the industry, pork quality assurance being another prominent one as well. And we demonstrate, yes, this is how we handle our animals properly. We do take care of them with respect, and we want to take pride in providing all of their needs to make sure that they have a healthy and happy life before they provide the food on our plate. And we as an industry have shown that, yes, hey, animal welfare is important to us, and we're willing to adopt and make changes in our operations to respond to consumers' demands for that. And so a number of people that I've spoken with in recent weeks, a number of those industry reports would show that, social equity and inclusion is coming down the road and has a possibility to be one of those determining factors in do consumers purchase their food products from one company over another. And so we've seen a rising interest in this, and it's likely to be a factor when we want to connect with consumers. And so what is agriculture doing today to work towards showcasing what we are doing to work to be a more diverse and inclusive industry as we are producing food for people's plates across the country and across the globe? So it's something to kind of think about. As I go through this, a lot of people have been asking for perfect solutions. Ryan, okay, well, if this is an issue, what's perfect solution? I don't have all of the answers, but one of the things that I do know is that we need to start having these conversations. And it's a presentation just like this. It's part of your meeting. How are we having these conversations that can play a role in finding out those solutions, finding out what can we do better, not only in our own organizations, but in our own businesses, but as a community as a whole, as we're contributing to some of those things. And so I want to reiterate, one of the things is that these conversations can be very uncomfortable as we, encounter things that are different and ideas that are different from our own perspectives and ideas. And I think that is a good thing. When we get outside of our comfort zone, we do learn. We do experience in different things. And just because we're experiencing something different doesn't mean that we have to change our views. For example, in the past, a lot of the things that I've broadened my experiences and I've talked to people that are of different beliefs than I am. It doesn't mean that I change my beliefs, but I have a better understanding of the larger picture and where things come together and how I can work better with others. This can be really difficult for a lot of people. One other illustration that I've heard it put is, this isn't a pie. Inviting someone else to the table doesn't make your piece smaller or doesn't take away from your part of the conversation. It builds up and makes us stronger by having those different perspectives at the table. And another one of the things, and I've learned this through advocacy, all throughout the years and different topics, no matter what it is that we're doing, and this includes diversity and inclusion conversations, that there will be times when we mess up. There will be times when I mess up and I say something incorrectly. But when someone corrects us, it's important not to get defensive, but to be open to that constructive criticism and learn that that is okay. And that's part of the process in learning how do we deal with some of these things better. So here's one example. I wanted to pull up an example of an ag organization that is doing things well. I think Farmers Union does well and is a leader in this across the country as well. But one more prominent example, more recent prominent example that has come up in the past month is Beef Farmers of Ontario stood up. And they not only, said, hey, yes, we will work towards these things, but they took policy actions as an organization to make change, to better address diversity and inclusion in their organization, in the industry, and in their communities. So I'd encourage you to seek it out. A quick Google and on their site shows shows a lot of this information. This little infographic has some of that, and I think some of the highlights that are examples of doing this well and being a leader and taking these actions is being committed to listening. That's one of the first steps. Is part of having these conversations when we aren't sure in how to address things, is being committed to listening to others, being able to listen to people who think differently than us and have different perspectives. That can be really important. Also, the organization pointed out that they need to have a better understanding of how their policies impact others. That's one of the tough things, is that when somebody comes up with a policy change or a line in their value statements, you can't point to that necessarily that one thing and say, well, that's not discriminating. A lot of the times it's what's not included or what's not recognized in that list. Is it impacting others negatively? Is it very inclusive of others' perspectives? The organization has also taken steps on being education on the issues, hosting another number of workshops, inviting experts in to talk more about how they can address diversity and inclusion in the ag industry and their organization as well. And education is a very important part of the step. They're also making sure to take reflection on looking at our actions self-serving. Are we just thinking about our priorities, or are we thinking about people who might be underrepresented in our industry? Those people who look different and may not have had the opportunity or courage to bring their voices forward, or did not feel like their perspectives were valued. Also, collaboration with other groups, other segments of the industry, and other people, making sure that they can be more diverse. Also, it's good for the organization, but being more inclusive of those perspectives can help us to be more successful. And also recognizing that these commitments should evolve as they learn more information. That's one of the funny things, and it's kind of a meme that's going around social media a little bit, is that, are we willing to change our perspectives or evolve our perspectives as new information is made available? We've seen a lot of that in the pandemic as we've seen the scientific process unfold in front of us. A lot of people complain, well, the science didn't say this 3 weeks ago. Yeah, but we're learning more as we go. And so are we allowing our perspectives and our commitments to evolve as the conversation continues? So I encourage you to kind of seek that out. That's a very prominent example, and I congratulate and thank Beef Farmers of Ontario for taking the steps to speak out on these issues, directly addressing diversity and inclusion in the industry, and taking steps and outlining how they are going to do that. So when we're having these conversations, like I said, one of these things is it can be very difficult to have these conversations because it is uncomfortable and we're afraid of messing up. But one of the keys that I want to share with you as an advocate, as someone who might want to be an ally to diverse groups, is how you say it matters. Again, I might mess up when I say some of these things, but these are things that we can always come back to. I've got an example for you. Kind of stepping back from the diversity and inclusion, heat of the discussion a little bit. This is related to agriculture and something that I experienced a few years ago. I had the opportunity to write for CNN through a series of events where I was joining conversations on their articles in the comments section and contributing a perspective of a farmer. CNN can be a much more liberal group, much more urban group compared to what most of us in agriculture and rural America may be exposed to on a regular basis. So I was very excited when one of their editors of their food page invited me to write sharing the perspectives of agriculture and helping to educate consumers. And I had the opportunity to write for them for several years. These are a couple of examples from 2012 where I was writing, and just saying, hey, here's what we want you to know about how beef gets to your plate, or what should a farmer look like. We are a very diverse community, and we aren't all, old white guys in overalls with a pitchfork standing in front of a barn, right? And so I was able to bring some of these conversations forward and sharing that with them. And some of the things where I messed up and how I said it that really detracted from my message um, happened along the way. And here's a couple of examples. One, I was asked by the editor to write an article explaining what if farmers and ranchers doing in the middle of winter. Some winter storms were coming across, and how does that impact the people that are developing, grazing our food supply? So what would happen is that I would send in my articles, and the editor would change the headline and select the photos that I submitted into which one would be a header photo and where they were placed throughout the article. And so the editor titled this first one is Frostbite on Their Teats and Other Cold Weather Farming Issues. So that's one of the things that, during calving season, frostbite can be a big thing. Dairy producers, if they've got their animals outside, frostbite can be a big issue. But I also submitted this picture of what I thought is a gorgeous Hereford bull in the middle of a snowstorm, and was a good depiction of, hey, we're out there even, in the middle of it. But combined with this headline, when I took this screenshot, the comments dove into and had a couple hundred comments of people that completely missed the point of the story and were telling me that bulls don't have teats. And so they didn't believe me at all. I mean, kind of humorous, right? But the way that was framed completely detracted from my message that I wanted to share in that article. Another example here, in 2011 and 12, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas went through an extreme and exceptional drought of great and catastrophic proportions. This picture here was I look back at older pictures and it's kind of poor quality now, but our pastures that were completely covered in grass, good standing forage with very little soil uncovered, normally we're completely stripped of any forages whatsoever. We had ponds that completely dried up. No water was to be had. We were having to haul in every bit of feed that our cattle were eating, and neighbors were complaining because the hay trucks were making their cars dirty as they drove through neighborhoods. And so I wrote how these drought conditions were impacting farmers and ranchers in our beef supply, our food supply, as it would come down the road. And my editor titled this one Praying for Rain in the Arkansas Drought. Because when the drought comes, that's what we do as an ag community, is say, well, pray for rain. We're going to pray for rain, right? Well, taking into context of the audience, a large portion of them aren't practicing Christians. And a lot of them took offense to being told to pray. And this whole comment section on this article filled up with people complaining about prayer and asking others to practice their religion. And that's something that just struck me really odd. And I wasn't prepared for that because I didn't pay attention to how my audience might perceive the words that I was sharing and how they might be different. And so I share this to say, diversity and inclusion, isn't always, right there in our face. We may not always realize something that others may take differently. And so how we phrase things can make a huge difference in how our message is received. So one of the biggest tips in these conversations that I can give you when you encounter someone who is different than you, or says that, they have experienced discrimination, or they don't feel that their perspectives are valued and included in our organization or our community, is that you take time to listen. I realize and I recognize that I'm here talking about diversity and inclusion as a white male. And some people have been critical to that, but I can say, you know what, I have a role in sharing not only my experiences, but encouraging my peers to take leadership and say, hey, everyone has a role in better conversations about diversity and inclusion. And one of the best ways that, that I can do that is to take time to listen to people that have had different experiences than me. And so active listening is something that can be really difficult. I've talked about this in advocacy for a long time, but especially when we get people that are very discouraged or feel attacked on very sensitive issues and sensitive topics, rather than sharing my perspective and sharing my thoughts and what I think solutions are right away, one of the best things that I can do is to listen and to clarify their views and their experiences. And so I'd encourage you to kind of take some time to practice this in some of these conversations. When we're having these conversations, it's really important to put aside distractions. Our phone can be a distraction, whether that's our phone, putting it on do not disturb, the television that's on, or whatever other materials that we have around us. Putting aside some of these things and really truly listening to people can be a huge game changer. And then some ways that you can engage in those conversations as they're sharing that, to be an active listener, is help asking questions to clarify what it is that they mean if you don't truly understand what it is that they're saying. And so one of those examples is, what do you mean when you say this? Or ask them, well, how would it help if how can I help in this situation? How can I help contribute to better understanding these issues? Do you have any recommendations for people that I ought to turn to? That can be really helpful in helping you to better understand their views. And when you get to a point and you do have some opinions, make sure to take time to think about how you say it and that you're sharing your opinions respectfully. Right. So one of the biggest things is just being able to show that you care about this topic and you're willing to engage. And when you do share those opinions, please do, but always do those things respectfully with your audience in mind. And a lot of these conversations are taking place on social media, which can be a really great tool, and online forums, whatever that might be. And without our verbal cues, our in-person cues, we rely a lot on nonverbals, and sometimes those conversations get very heated. And so here's some best practices that I have for you engaging in these conversations online and offline anytime that you encounter someone that disagrees with you. One of the first things is to find common ground. What do you have in common? What do you have in shared interests, shared experiences with other people? How can you connect with them as a person first, right? Before you share your experiences with them. Ask questions. Ask those questions of, what do you mean by this? Or can you tell me a little bit more about that experience? Can be really important. If you have personal examples, those are important to help illustrate facts and figures and being able to bring some of those up. But it's really important, I think, for a lot of us in rural America, we're not exposed to a lot of the things that happen in urban America, in suburban America, and larger population centers. And so using social media, online sources can be really important in staying informed about what's happening across our country and different people who think differently. And those can be really great tools in gaining a better understanding of things. Some things that I would encourage you to avoid is don't throw insults or make comments about someone's intelligence. It's kind of said that it's okay to debate and attack ideas, but don't attack other people. When you start attacking other people, that completely shuts down the conversation. When I'm having a back and forth in the comments section online with someone and they start attacking me, my character, I know that that conversation is not really going anywhere. It's also really important that we don't repeat false or negative information. One of the key indicators of this is if something evokes strong emotional responses, check our sources, check our information, and verify that it is accurate. If something evokes strong emotional responses, do a fact check right there. And don't amplify opponents' voices, right? So be very careful not to amplify our opponent's voices in a way that's going to elevate some of those things. That can be really important. Step outside of this diversity and inclusion conversation a little bit with an ag example. A couple of years ago, PETA had a Facebook profile photo filter. So, on your profile photo on Facebook, you can put a filter on there. It's kind of a word or phrase or an image that you can overlay on your profile photo. And PETA had one that said, "Shoot selfies, not animals." Right. And a lot of people used it. Who do you think was a popular user of that filter? Hunters, anglers, farmers, ranchers, people that were poking a finger at PETA and saying, haha, look, yeah, I'm going to shoot selfies, not animals, because it was photos of their game, of their meat, um, carcasses hanging in their freezer, their trophy deer that they shot, or elk, whatever that might have been. And what did those people do? They amplified PETA's message. They did their marketing for them. And so a lot of the times when we are saying, outrage towards someone or showing that, take a moment to step back and say, am I amplifying my opponent's message? I don't think that that's a very good contribution to a productive conversation when you're doing that. And so I'll wrap up here before we have time for a little bit of comments and questions and conversation. And just reminding you, in any of these conversations, in any of these situations, communication is a two-way street. I'm very proud of our community for sharing our perspectives, for engaging in these conversations. But keep in mind that it's important to listen as well. We must interact and we must engage with our audience. And so sometimes, just as important as putting out our message, it is listening to others and better understanding their experiences as part of these conversations. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you may have. Here's my contact information. You can reach me at email, ryan@beefrunner.com. Beefrunner.com is my website, or you can reach me on any social media site as @beefrunner.
Is there any questions out there for Ryan? You can type them in the Q&A or raise your hand or put them in the chat box. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Ryan?
No, I think we covered, kind of a core of a couple of different things. And I definitely would love to hear any other experiences or thoughts that other people have. I know that this has been a big conversation for a lot of folks. I would say, coming from, a diversity and inclusion conversations, if people are looking for some resources or some organizations that are going out there specific to the LGBTQ community, Cultivating Change Foundation has been one organization that has materials available, and being able to find some of those things that are out there. I'd also encourage people to just seek out some of these conversations. In rural America, we're not always in a position to have easy access to people who think differently than we do. So, maybe sometimes we can seek out some of these conversations to have a better understanding of what's going on.
In your, I guess, in your view, are you starting to see a lot more ag organizations provide diversity training? Are you seeing more people jump on the bandwagon to try to be more inclusive of everybody?
Yeah, I think diversity and inclusion training is something that a lot of organizations in different industries have turned to. We have some allied industry members who are doing a great job in the ag industry. Think of some of your major brands. Zoetis has been recognized for their efforts in diversity and inclusion, along with companies like Bayer, John Deere, McDonald's, and Cargill. Cargill specifically, I've talked to some Cargill folks who have taken great strides in just evaluating diversity of their organization and taking strides towards better inclusion. All of those sites have easy access to their policies and their work that have been done. So just going and Googling some of those major brands that I just mentioned and inclusivity and diversion, they have landing pages that describe what actions they are taking and how they can do some of that. And so some of those diversity inclusion trainings haven't made their way to easy access in the ag industry, but I do hope that some of those things do take place soon.
And I think in your presentation, you made a good point where you said businesses that are really focusing on inclusion and diversity, they've seen 33% more profitability, which I think in today, any chance we can get ahead is definitely important. But bringing, people of all different types, demographics, race, color, I think that's highly important and where we need to be headed.
Yep, definitely it is. Bringing those different perspectives to the table. We always talk about, well, let's brainstorm, let's get together. Well, when you bring only like-minded people together on a topic, you're only going to find like-minded things. But when we invite people who do have different perspectives, I think that can only make us stronger. And so we shouldn't be afraid of that. It should be something that helps us to build and have great new ideas and be more inclusive in that.
Ryan, we do have a question here. It says, can you address having these conversations in a workplace setting when there is a power dynamic? For example, when an elected official is in our office and makes statements that don't show respect for certain populations. I find it challenging to engage in a way that will be well received.
Yeah, good question there. I've been in some of these situations and they don't always go well, and it can be very intimidating to speak up when someone says something. But I think that is really important that we do speak up and call to attention some of these things that are taking place. That's something that I haven't done well in the past, and I'm making a pointed effort um, to say something when something could be derogatory or demeaning towards other people who are different, maybe whether or not they are in the room. And so one of the important keys to that is when we do speak up is not making the other person feel attacked, trying not to attack them when we do speak up. Because if we do that, we immediately just shut down that opportunity for conversation, and they may go on defense. Tying it back to how we feel or how we are impacted by some of these statements um, can be a better approach to some of these things, and having a solution. And so that's, depending on the situation and how you frame it, that can be really important. But that'd be my number one key for you, is just how you phrase those things. Make sure that we're not making the other person, the target who we're speaking to feel attacked in some of that. Um, and that can be different in different things, and that can be very difficult in, in kind of whether there's different tiers of leadership or in the professional space, different levels in the organization. And so sometimes those conversations can take place after the meeting, asking someone for just a quick conversation aside, if we don't want to speak out in front of the group, or asking to schedule a meeting to speak up. In organizations, HR managers can be a good person to turn to. Or if you have a boss or a supervisor, or if needed, a peer or a coworker that can go with you for that conversation, that can be, that can help make those things a little bit easier in doing that, and having an ally in sport and sharing some of that conversation.
Is there any other questions out there for Ryan? Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us today, and always appreciate your advocacy efforts across the board, whether it be farming, ranching. But it's always good to work with you, and always good to see you. We'll definitely continue to work more in the future, and hopefully you make it back to Montana soon.
Yes, definitely looking forward to it. It might be when it's a little bit warmer.
Sure.
Not that this winter's been bad, but definitely love our summers in Montana. So I do appreciate it, and thank you all. And please reach out. Any of my contact information, direct messages on social media anytime that you'd like a little more insight or have any questions. So thank you all.
All right. Thanks again, Ryan. We'll be in touch.